Hi folks, welcome back. Thank you for watching. Please do hit subscribe if you haven't done so yet. It really does help when you do that. So today folks, I've got a pedal to show you that I've wanted to check out ever since I saw it be announced 2 or 3 years ago. This here is the ThorpyFX Camoflange. Now, I'm a big fan of ThorpyFX. He's based only about 50 miles away from me. I'm in Somerset, he's in Wiltshire. I've got his chain home tremolo on my board. It's one of my favourite trems, and every other pedal of his I've ever heard has sounded absolutely wonderful. I just love how he goes about things, and all of his pedals are built to just the highest possible standards. Now, this pedal here is an all-analog flanger pedal with a lot of functionality, and it's widely heralded online as being one of the greatest flanger pedals ever made. But what's really interesting about the Camoflange is it isn't just a ThorpyFX pedal. This pedal was designed and built in conjunction with a chap called Dan Coggins, who was the brains behind Dinosaural and Lovetone, those big pedals, the first of the boutiques that came out in the 90s that still go for huge money online today. So he's something of a legend in the world of pedals. So for him to now be collaborating with somebody held in as high regard as Thorpy is no small deal in the world of effects. So what I'm going to do today is first and foremost talk you through what each of the 6 controls do, because that is important to cover in a very in-depth flanger pedal, and then dial in a variety of different sounds to show you how all of these controls are quite interactive with each other. So without further ado, let's get cracking. Right, so I've got the pedal plugged in over here now, and I think a good place to start today is to talk about what an analog BBD flanger pedal such as the Camoflange does to your signal. So you plug your guitar into the pedal, and on the input your signal is split into 2 different components. On one side you have the dry signal or the clean signal, and that pretty much goes straight to the output jack. It isn't touched by the internals of the pedal in any way. On the other side though, you have the wet signal, and that is what this pedal is delaying and manipulating and pulling about. And if you have just the wet signal, that's the very obvious pitch bending seasicky vibrato sound. If you have just the dry signal, that's your guitar plugged straight into the amp. The pedal won't be doing anything at all. But it's when those 2 components are summed together on the output that interesting things happen. It's the dry signal and the wet signal together interplaying against each other that create the cool effect. Now, today I'm going to kind of begin the playing element of this demo by talking through what each of these 6 knobs do, because the controls on flanger pedals can lead to a bit of confusion. Some are very obvious. Treble, you can guess what that does, but manual, harmonics, what are those actually doing? So we're going to start there today. Now, the sound of my guitar plugged straight into my JTM45 clone is this. So a very clean guitar sound. The amp is pretty loud in the room, but it's not anywhere close to breaking up, so there's plenty of headroom to spare. Now, before I turn the pedal on, 2 things to say. Firstly, I've put bits of paper over the LEDs. That's simply because they're so bright they were destroying the camera shot. So you can still see everything that's going on, just pretend those aren't there. And also, I'm going to do my best today to keep this pedal as clean as possible during the demo, but this polished metal enclosure is a nightmare for showing up sweaty fingerprints and things. It's long been a slight criticism of all Thorpy pedals really, that the polished metal enclosures are a little bit difficult to use. A, to keep them clean, B, if you're someone like me trying to set a camera up over the top of them, it's quite difficult to actually get a good camera shot, and C, and probably most importantly, the controls, or the writing of what the controls are engraved in the shiny metal, and they're actually quite hard to read. So once you know this pedal, you know what all the controls do, it's very easy to use. But when you're still learning it, you do have to get down and look quite closely to see what the knobs actually are. It is a little bit tricky to read that engraved metal font. So I'm going to do my best to keep the camera shot as good as I can today, is what I'm trying to say. So, with everything set at 12 o'clock, which I know is the standard Gumby pedal demo thing to do, but with this pedal it does actually make a few of the controls easier to actually explain what they're doing if we start at 12 o'clock. You'll see that shortly. So the sound of the Camoflange with everything at 12 is this. So straight away, with absolutely zero effort there, we've got a very classic, bright, metallic flanger sound. So it's not hard to dial in a really good sound with this pedal. So, to get into what the knobs do then, I'm going to start with probably the most simple and work up to the ones that require more explanation. So in the bottom left-hand corner here, we have the treble control. And as you would expect, as you turn it up, the pedal sounds brighter, turn it down, the pedal sounds darker. Pretty self-explanatory. But one thing the Camoflange is really good for is copying the sounds of the original 18 volts Electric Mistress, which is a notoriously bright, crystalline sounding pedal. So turning up the treble control will give you less filtering in the top end. You will get a little bit more noise coming through by doing that, but you can brighten it up to sound closer to the old Electric Mistress, or you can darken it to sound a little bit more warm and mellow. So up top you get more sort of presence, more kind of upper mids really, and as you turn it down you start to shelve those frequencies off. So it's really good for dialing this pedal into your rig and suiting your personal preferences and kind of what sort of flanger tone you're going after. The bright Mistress sound, something like the MXR M117, which is a slightly more warm mellow sound, you can dial them all in just by adjusting that one control. So that's really nice. So the second control here in the bottom middle is the blend control. Now this is a really interesting addition to a flanger pedal because not all flanger pedals have this. And basically what this does is it adjusts the ratio of your wet and dry signal, as we were just saying. So if you turn it all the way down, you get just the dry signal, so basically the pedal's bypassed, it's the sound of your guitar into your amp. And as you turn it up, about 50% or 12 o'clock is probably the most extreme flanger sound because you have equal components of wet and dry. And as you turn it up to the top, you get pitch bending vibrato. So it's really nice, and you can set the pedal, which we'll get into later on, pretty extreme, but then dial the blend right down so it doesn't become overbearing or too comical sounding. So a lot of different sounds to be had adjusting the blend control. So I turned the rate and depth up there just to make it a little more obvious what was happening. But up top, you get the pitch vibrato thing. Down, I turn the pedal on and off. It has no effect because you're just getting the dry signal. 50% is kind of the most extreme flanging. But you get infinite tweakability on the blend between your wet and dry. So that's a really, really nice feature of this pedal. Now, rate, depth, and manual. I think we need to talk here about how the pedal is manipulating the wet component of your signal. So let's say you have your dry signal here, right? Input, dry signal. Your wet signal on top is delayed, and the manual control sets the center point of that delay. So if you turn the manual all the way down, you get a very short delay time. That gives you a real kind of metallic sound. And as you turn the manual up, you get a longer kind of core delay time. And the longer the main delay time, you get a slightly more kind of honky, resonant, guttural sound. out of the pedal. That's just the effect that different delay times create in the flanger pedal. So you can kind of think of the manual, this isn't what it's doing, but you can kind of think of it a little bit as a sort of EQ for the actual flanger sound. It's more guttural as you turn it up, it's brighter and more metallic as you turn it down, basically. Now, when you have that fixed delay point, the rate is how quickly it goes either side and back again to the centre. So a slow rate will be sweeping very slowly, fast rate will be doing it quickly. That's very obvious. And the depth is how far either side of the fixed delay point the oscillation goes. So a low depth will be doing that, a high depth will be doing that. So it gets more extreme as you turn the depth up. So let's have a little look at those three controls then. We're going to start with the rate, and as you would expect, you turn it up, it becomes much faster. So again, I turn the depth up there just to make it more obvious what's happening. So faster rate, it moves faster, fairly obviously. Now the depth, as I said, is how far either side of that delay point it goes. So the higher the depth, the more obvious the effect is. Now, as you turn the depth down to 0, as I've just done here, that basically turns the modulation part of the pedal off. So you're only left with that fixed delay point. It's not moving either side of it. So the way you set the rate doesn't matter because you're not actually getting any movement. Now, I'm going to leave it set there for now to describe what the manual control is doing. Now, as I said, it sets the fixed delay point, but by having the oscillation turned off, you can really hear that a lot more clearly. So turn it down, shorter delay time compared to the dry, more metallic sound. As you turn it up, longer delay time, and you start to get those kind of phase cancelling resonant boxy filter type things. So as I said, you can kind of think of that a little bit as a basic mid-range EQ for the pedal. That's not what it's doing, but that's the end result. So it's more guttural as you turn it up, basically. So one interesting thing about this, actually, before I turn the depth back up, is you can very visually see what this pedal is doing by moving the manual knob manually. So you get the fixed delay, but a fast rate would be this. Very deep depth would be this. So that's basically what the depth and rate are doing. They're moving the manual control for you, essentially. You can think of it like that anyway. So let's set it all back to 12 o'clock just while we move on to the final control, which is the harmonics control. Now this is a feature that I associate much more closely with something like the ADA flanger. They used a harmonic control and it was very, very cool, because what it does is it takes some of the output of the pedal and feeds it back into the start of the circuit. So it kind of creates a bit of a feedback loop. And that's what creates the whistly, sort of watery feedback type thing of the ADA flanger. It's a little bit like the colour switch on a small stone phaser, or the Mutron phaser with its, I think it's just called the feedback control. It's basically the same thing. It takes some of the output and feeds it back in. Now at 12 o'clock here, and this is why it's easy to start with the knobs all at 12, there's no feedback at all, so it's completely cut out at 12. But then as you turn it clockwise or anti-clockwise, you get odd and even order harmonics. Now, basically all you need to know about that is it sounds very similar, it's just a slightly different voice. So I'll show you exactly what that does now. And I'm going to turn the treble control up a little bit at the end, because that can create a very interesting effect, which you may recognise. So it starts to add more and more feedback, and as you take away some of that top end filtering, you get even more feedback, and it starts to go into self-oscillation. So if I turn the pedal off, turn the treble up and the harmonics up, if you've ever heard some of Paul Gilbert's crazy flanging effects, he uses an old ADA flanger, or I did before it exploded, I think. And if you know a song like Paul versus Godzilla, that's kind of what it is. That sort of thing. And of course, as you adjust the other four controls as well, it affects how ridiculous that feedback is. So that's basically what this pedal is doing in terms of its basic feature set. And I do think it's important to start there because, as I said, flanger pedals are a source of confusion for a lot of people in terms of what those controls actually do. So hopefully my very basic explanation of using the age-old method of wobbly hands explains it in a little bit more detail. So what I'm going to do now is a bit more extended playing and just adjust all of these controls to different points, because they are very interactive with each other, and you move one and it kind of changes the behaviour of another. So I'm going to start with that and just get creative, play a bit and see what crazy sounds we can get out of this pedal. So there we are, folks. Now please do comment underneath, let me know what you thought of the Camoflange today. Did you like the tones you heard? Do you agree with most of the internet that this is one of the greatest flanger pedals ever made? I love chatting nerdy guitar stuff with you folks down in the comments section. That extended playing was going pretty well until the final chord that I completely screwed up, wasn't it? But anyway, we got there. So what do I think of the Camoflange then? Well, I love the fact it has the top end content of the old 18 volts Electric Mistress. I love the fact you have the harmonics control like the old ADA flanger. I love the fact you can make it more mellow and warm and soupy like the old MXR 117. And I was going to sit here in this outro and say, to me, this is like a greatest hits of classic flanger pedals. This morning I sat down and read the paperwork they actually send out with this thing, which I don't normally do. And they detail that is exactly what they were shooting for with this pedal, to be able to emulate all of those old classic vintage analog flanger circuits. So I'm glad I'm now not sat here proclaiming that was my big revelation when it's literally the point of the pedal. But I love the fact you get adjustability over the top end content and it's not just fixed. It means you can dial in a lot of different flanging sounds. You can match it to a certain guitar or amp rig, or even just your personal preferences, so that's great. I really love the blend control because, as you heard in that extended playing, you can set the rest of the pedal pretty wacky, but then dial the blend right back. So it's in there, but it's not overbearing and defining your guitar sound. And that's one thing I love to do when I'm recording, set the rate of a flanger very slow and tickle it in just a little bit. And it takes an otherwise boring, sterile strummed rhythm guitar part and just adds that subtle, slow sweep to it that gives it another dimension. And I love the fact that I can do that with a knob on the pedal rather than having to split my guitar sound and run a parallel rig to create that effect. So that's fantastic. Having the harmonics control to dial in that watery feedback is lovely. As you heard, you can push it to the extreme and make it go absolutely haywire. That does sound a little bit comedy, but having that sound there is fun on occasion. So there is so much to love about the Camoflange, and in so many ways it really is one of, if not the greatest flanger pedals I have ever played, especially in terms of how much functionality it gives you for the fidelity of the flanger. It is outstanding. But that said, there are a couple of things about this pedal that have been grating on me a little bit, having got to know it for the last couple of months. The first is such a tiny thing that literally only I and a small handful of other people would even care about, so it's not a problem with this pedal as such. But the second one is a little bit more fundamental. So the first super trivial point is, when this pedal was first announced, a big part of the initial marketing campaign was that the pedal contained, I'm going to take a deep breath here, new old stock Bucket Brigade delay chips made by Panasonic/Matsushita that Dan Coggins had left over from doing the Lovetone flanger. So it was a real emphasis of that push. The launch video they did with that pedal show had all these old BBDs laid out, and Thorpe was saying how wonderful it was to give these old chips a new lease of life in a modern production pedal. I'm a sucker for that stuff. I'm a real nerd for collecting pedals with vintage components in. So I bought this Camoflange, opened it up and found some cool audio reissue chips in it. So I dropped Thorpe an email and said, "Hi, I've just bought one of your pedals secondhand." It always feels a bit awkward to say to a manufacturer, but there we are. Has the previous owner pocketed those posh BBDs, stuck some reissues in and sold it on to me? And Thorpe said, "No, those are the chips we use now. The NOS chips ran out," which of course they were always going to at some point, but nobody knew how many Dan may or may not have had squirreled away. The honest truth is, I would have probably still bought this particular pedal knowing it had the reissue chips in it. I just wished that I'd been slightly more aware of exactly what I was buying, and that inevitable crossover point of the NOS chips running out and switching to using the reissues had happened, given how much of an emphasis was put on those chips specifically when it was launched. Now, Thorpe said the cool audio reissues sound exactly the same in the circuit as the NOS chips did. I've got no reason to doubt him on that. But as I said, for people like me who are a sucker for collecting pedals with those old components in, it would have been nice to know exactly what I was buying, or for this to be a version 2 with a slightly different graphic, or something to differentiate between old chips and new chips. So something that literally only people like me would even be aware of, let alone care about. But it's something to note if you followed that initial marketing campaign. They don't use those original Panasonic Matsushita BBDs anymore. The second thing, though, is something that has been a real deal breaker for me with this pedal, which is really sad. And it's something that has been discussed online in comment sections under videos and on forums, so I don't want to go on about this too much because it has been covered a lot elsewhere. But the problem is the headroom of this pedal. Now, today I was using a guitar with a very vintage correct Filtertron pickup in it, very thin, really chimey, super low output. I think the DC resistance is like 4, so it's a very low output vintage style guitar overall. But still, in a few places, especially when I hit the lower strings of the guitar even remotely hard, the initial transient of what I played was crunching up, and that is something that has been noted a lot elsewhere about this pedal. The headroom isn't as high as you might hope. Now, today, as I said, I was using a very low output guitar. If you were using a Les Paul with a PAF pickup in it, it's going to cause more problems. If you're going to use a high output guitar, not that you necessarily would with a vintage analog flanger type pedal, like a bare knuckle nail bomb pickup or something, is probably going to act more as a gain stage than a modulation pedal. So it's just something to be aware of. Now, I'm going to put this pedal on my pedal board. Today you've been listening to the guitar plug straight into the pedal, straight into the amp. But I'm going to put it onto my pedal board because it's important to note how this pedal integrates into a modern guitar rig. And many of us will put our modulation pedals in the middle of the board and run overdrives and boosts and things into it. So watch what happens when I do that. So it really does crunch up with anything approaching a boosted signal going into it. Even with a low output guitar plugged straight into the input, it was causing problems in a few places. Now, Thorpy's did say to me that those BBDs do distort with hotter signals, and there's nothing they can really do to change that. And I did wonder whether my particular Camoflange had been taken apart by the previous owner and they'd adjusted the bias and set it wrong. So in the last few days I've been watching lots of other demos of this pedal online, setting my pedal to exactly how they had it set at a certain point in a video, playing with a similar intensity and seeing how the distortion did or didn't match up. And in every case it matched up. So it's not my pedal, it's just how this pedal is. So some old style modulations really thrive on having a bit of grit and distortion in there. The old CE1 chorus ensemble and that crunchy preamp really defined that pedal. And if you're running it with the treble down and the blend down, you might not ever notice it's there. But if you want to use the full extent of the controls on this pedal and go to the extremes, you do need to be aware that in many instances it will crunch up, especially if you're boosting into it or running it post gain or anything like that. It can cause problems. So as I said, I don't want to go on about this too much, and I already have, but for me, I would not be being honest if I sat here and didn't say that I felt a bit disappointed by that. Because when I play this pedal, I'm not getting lost and immersed in an incredible flanger sound and becoming super connected and inspired by it. I feel really disconnected because I'm sat there playing going, don't hit it too hard, don't hit it too hard, oh, I hit it too hard, and it's crunching up and it's ruining takes of recordings. It's really been bugging me. And that has been a real deal breaker for me and this pedal, which is so sad because, as I said, in so many ways, it genuinely is one of the greatest flanger pedals ever made. It just falls at that final hurdle, and I bought this pedal fully anticipating that next time I rebuild my pedal board, it's going straight on there as the best flanger I've ever played, and it almost gets there. It just doesn't quite, and it's really sad because I really, really love this pedal in so many ways, and I wanted to love it and hold on to it and use it all the time. But for me, that Headroom is just it's a real problem for me, if I'm honest. But anyway, folks, I don't want to go on about it anymore. But please do let me know your thoughts and opinions down in the comments section. I love hearing from you guys and finding out what you think about all this sort of stuff. So thank you for watching, folks. I hope this video was interesting and useful for you. Please do carry on subscribing. I know I always say it, but it makes a huge difference when you hit subscribe. And I will see you very, very soon. Bye-bye.